Now here's an exciting, vibrant score, and once again, sometimes we have a situation where where a supporter at a higher level is only able to do the first section, and it doesn't really matter because it's just, in this case, I'm going to give you some more time, Scott, and also it's just there's so much to talk about and so many great things in this score that it's really going to keep me on my toes. Okay, so let's talk about those evaluation criteria. All right. So, as far as there being kind of a limited amount of pitches, the pitch weight being in the upper middle register in the original piano score, that's not a big concern, right? You have made this kind of a full-bodied orchestration, similar to Martin Sebastian Smith's entry that I evaluated last week. Okay, but there is, I don't know, it's a concern. I'm not going to say that it's a problem, but there is a bit of a concern with the similarity between phrases, right? That's something that I was making as a criteria for the evaluation, just because, like, do you want to do the same thing more or less twice? Now here, there's a little bit of variation in your horn and trumpet scoring, a little bit of variation in the lower heavy brass from time to time. But generally speaking, it's a similar approach both times. And then for the second phrase of each group of 8, that it's similar. It's not identical, obviously, because the parts aren't identical in the piano score. All right, so I would just say, if you are going to come back to this and you make it more of a serious thing, think about what you could possibly do to vary it a little bit, just so that it isn't so much copy paste. I mean, I don't want. That's kind of a brutal thing to say, because you do have slight variations between the two parts, but the variations are not really enough to be, to make any change to the listener, right? Okay. Now, the question of the accompaniment figures covering a wide range, you have more or less solved. I mean, this is a pretty high leap up here in the violas, but it's not that big of a deal, really. And so, like, here you drop back down to the B, right? Which is a lot easier on your cellos. Now, the whole question, though, of the melodic development soaring quite high, as I mentioned in previous scores, by now, this kind of stuff is playable with really good string players. The whole concern is whether or not it is going to be shrieky, right? And then the same thing here. But here, what is really cool is how you run up to D, and then you just let the overtones do the work by jumping down and hitting this E an octave lower. So that is a nice way of fooling the ear into thinking that something has happened there, right? And there are ways of using piccolo, as you might have seen in other entries and in my own orchestrating Falla lessons, where I take apart my orchestration and explain why I did certain things and so on. Okay, so that doesn't mean that everything is perfect with these two concerns about the melodic development going high, the accompaniment figures covering a wide range. This is probably not going to work right in here. Just in general, I mean, it's not a big problem to go E, B, B, and then A, D, A, D, B. But this is really more of a flute part, right? It just is so much more opportune for a flute player to play this, so much easier on them. And then you get to here, and this is just really not very likely. I mean, it's playable by a really, really good oboe player in terms of getting this perfect, but it's still just so much work, and then like once again you're going up to F and then E and so on, and it's very exposed. So I would say, look, just give the flute-like stuff to the flute player, right? And don't necessarily count on that very, very thin sound that's hard to control for the oboe as just coming off really perfectly. I mean, there's a bit of a parallel here with horn players, cracking high notes, right? It's not the same exact thing that's going wrong, but it is a question of embouchure, and it is a question of the tightening of the sound picture and everything else as you get higher and higher on an instrument like that. In general, you are scoring your oboes pretty high with abandon, and higher than flutes, right? Like, look at this. You've got this F sharp and G sharp, right? Why couldn't this be A2 oboes and then have your flutes play this, right? Or why couldn't, say, maybe this be A2 oboes and this be flutes, and then this G sharp and this D be flute notes and this be an A2 oboe note? You know what I mean? Like, maybe there's a way of juggling some of these pitches so that they are more playable by the instruments that are involved. Now, you've got that similar doubling line with a cello. This would be playable by trombone. I think that it would be better in these situations with really, really agile kinds of lines to really have a single trombonist playing. And that is not because two trombonists sound funny when they try to play lines like this. Not at all. But it's just that I think it has a better, more profound effect. And especially when you are, you've got like bassoon involved as well and so on. Like, if you got your first bassoon player playing this, it's going to be a better balance with your trombone player, right? Working together. Yeah, and just like this, B, D, A, jump up to F, and then play B. It's just better as a single trombone player, I feel. Yeah. So I'm looking at this, and I am kind of noting how you have got your horns in C. Okay, so I mean, pretty much the scoring is fine, except for this little thing happening right here. You're jumping up to a high written C, right, and then back down to this note right here, which is going to be F sharp at the top of the staff. So that's like a, and you're getting there from E below the staff. So you're going E, jump up to high C, and then down to F sharp. And I just feel, look, this is a trumpet. This is a trumpet part. You're giving it to your horn player. You're making his life hell, right? So, or her life hell. So just, score it for the right instrument. Give this to the flutes, give that to the first trumpet, and everything will fall into place a whole lot better for you, okay? So just watch out for that kind of thing. Okay, now back to our evaluation criteria. We had the problem of the upper middle register continuing on, being relentless. If there was no textural contrast, that is not a big problem. Okay, but it brings up this other issue, okay? And that is reusing certain functions in certain prominent instruments. So right here, you have A3 trumpets playing this da-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da part. And, pretty strongly. Okay, so once again, you've got these high agile playing, and you've written it A2. I just really feel that's better as a single trombone. Okay, but back to this. So you've got A3 scoring, and I feel that this works terrifically well. If I were going to work with you on editing this and whatever, I would actually say, I'm going to make some suggestions about how the trumpet is working and so on. I would say don't change this. That is really, really a cool idea to have this kind of insane A3 playing. I think that works really, that works great. It's so full and it's so rich and it's so cutting, so effective. And I'll talk a little bit more about it on the next page. But do you really want that slurred sound? Because you've got staccato everywhere else, right? You got this bop 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 bop, right? And here you got da da, and then here you have like these really long slurs da da. Yeah, do you really want that in a piece that is so staccato and so punchy? Okay, and then there's also the problem that by the time you get here to this incredibly effective part, you really have kind of used up the listener's sense of wonder, right? Like one part of orchestration is the kind of magic trick of amazing the listener, right? So how long can you continue to amaze the listener when they're kind of hearing the same elements being used for the same things a lot? And that's one of the strong arguments for varying the approach, right? I actually just saw a comment pop up saying, "Oh, I don't agree with Thomas's evaluation criteria of varying, varying parts going forwards." And I mean, here is the such a strong argument as to why that is because this incredibly useful scoring right in here is being a bit it's losing its sense of innovation right when it is the most useful, right? So if there were some way of having this little the little end part of the phrase ba da 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 kind of reinterpreted in a different way, and maybe you got all these wind players kind of not doing anything. Maybe if there was a different approach to that, and also to this line right in here, then your trumpets can come back in this kind of massive little da 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 dum ba da da dum scoring, and they're so effective with the way that you have everything else scored. Now, there's another point that I don't want to miss, and it was like the first thing that I noticed. And if this was something that you had to do in order to make the idea of a grace note glissando work with enough time, then I am completely sympathetic. But this is something that you could have done without having to add a pickup bar, an anacrusis. You could have just scored this as portamento, right? I mean, scoring it out this way makes it very exact. There's always a little bit of ambiguity, right? Whether or not a that kind of thing is intended to be before the beat, on the beat. Is it supposed to subtract from the where? Is it supposed to like take part of the downbeat and so the next note falls after the downbeat? All these things, just real big concerns, especially to harp players who have a lot of rolls scored, right? So is the roll on the beat? Is the roll rolling into the beat and everything else? Because composers might mean two different things at two different parts of the same piece. I am a horrible roll into the beat type of pianist, and like sometimes I do that even when I know that the composer intended something different, just because I can't help myself. It's a bad habit to not think about it. But yeah, the same thing applies for grace notes. Whether the grace note is whether you're going da da or da da, right? So, I mean, technically speaking, the difference between a cacciatura and a poggiatura and so on. Those things are defined to a degree, but all the same, that in a situation like this where you have like no time to work certain things out, and almost no rehearsal time, then yeah, maybe it's wiser for you to throw in that little anacrusis and just push into the beat. So that just leads us to the last concern: maintaining a driving staccato. Transitioning smoothly into the next passage is less clear because we don't know what you would have intended to do going from there. And if you were to score out the B section, which would have been nice, especially since you have the right to do that, right? At your level of support, and also just the interestingness of the previous scoring makes me want to see more, right? I just would like to see what you would have done with B. But all the same, everything coming to a close here, that's all fine. I think that you could score out your horns on two staves and four parts, where needed, without everything just because the problem with this kind of scoring everything on one staff is that almost encourages you to not score very contrapuntally, very interdependently with your horns. It kind of almost forces you to think in terms of just big chords, similar to like trumpet scoring, right? It kind of suggests a trumpet scoring like with the three parts on one staff for your four horns with four parts on one staff. Yeah, so there's something missing here, and that is the diminuendo, right? So diminuendo, you should figure out what dynamic this is, right? And the diminuendo mark should go to the chord, and the chord should be marked whatever this is, like maybe mezzo forte. And the same thing should be true for all of these parts. Obviously, you don't need a diminuendo over some rest, so you could just mark whatever, mezzo forte, or I don't know, maybe even mezzo piano. Just depending on how much you want this to dovetail across. Yeah, and then just, marcato. The marcato mark probably should go after the dynamic in italics, right? Rather than over, because it's not really, it's more of an articulation style and an attitude kind of style than it is a technique, right? I mean, yes, you will have to apply the technique of the bowing to it to make it marcato, but I would say put your marcato mark or your marcato text after the dynamic. So forte marcato. And yeah, then you've got this big push right in here, letting off. So yes, look, it was just really a great entry. Just really enjoyed this a lot. So nice work, Scott. Thanks so much for the work that you put into this and for supporting on Patreon. It just was really helpful, and it's just really great to get something like this that I can really dig into and give you some pointers about some future scoring stuff. So yeah, so just I would say try to score in transposition. Try to or at the very least transpose your parts after you're through scoring them, right? And then you'll see, wow, this goes up to high C, right? You'll be more aware of what the player sees, right? And yeah, and just don't pop out these like high Fs and everything else. A lot of high notes for like extreme high notes for wind and brass players kind of have to be approached by step, right, rather than by leap. And then they're a lot easier to play. But horns are not, are not faultlessly effortless in terms of their ability to leap around and play all kinds of things all over the place. They're not like flutes. So watch out for that. Try to put your dynamics below rather than above. And yeah, for something like this, like you have 1, 2, 3, 4, you're sort of telling us how things are supposed to be divided up. And then here you're saying horn in F 1, 3, 2, 4, right? Yeah, that if you are putting that in the music, there kind of is no need. Like, and then right here you have this. Like, I mean, if you just scored this as a single, as a single interval, then yeah, then you could. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Yeah, just divide it into 2 staves next time. Okay, and that will possibly give you more ideas of how you could use your horns in different ways. Maybe your horns could be the part of the variability right in here of approach that helps you to not overuse the trumpets so that they will be more innovative right in here, right? Anyway, so I hope I gave you a lot to think about, Scott. That is really the whole point of this, right? In the end, is that, for the community to come together around ways that we could all improve and think more deeply and get more perspectives from each other's feedback, right? And that was mine. And hopefully you'll get a lot more suggestions below. So thanks again. Thanks everybody. Thank you website subscribers. Thank you Patreon supporters. And why wait around? Just go to the next evaluation now.